play. So today's topic is practice, practice, practice. So John, you can take it away from here.
Yeah, thanks, Tammy. As Tammy mentioned, I'm John Taylor. I'm a clinical social worker, and my practice is just outside of Salt Lake City, Utah. I primarily work with folks struggling with sexual addiction. I work with both addicts and spouses, and I also do a lot of work with their marriages. So that's kind of where this webinar was born. I find that a lot of the work that folks do individually to get sober or to get stable after finding out about their loved one's addiction, a lot of those skills translate really well into relationships and making our relationships work better. And I think that in many ways that's the end product, the end opportunity in recovery, is to have relationships that you really love being a part of. So today we're going to talk about the concept of practice, and this is a little bit of a different way to look at interacting in our relationships. So I'm going to start out with a question that I'm going to send to everybody. It just popped up in the chat. What's one struggle you have when it comes to effectively making the changes that you want to make? So if you'd like to respond, go ahead and type in your response. You can send that to all panelists if you don't want the other attendees to see your responses. But go ahead and think about that for a minute and send in an answer, and we can incorporate that into our discussion. And while those are coming in, I'm going to talk about why I think the concept of practice is helpful when it comes to relationships. First of all, no relationship that you are a part of comes with an instruction manual. Or comes with a clear set of, here's the rules, here's the expectations. We're all kind of thrown into these relationships without clear-cut expectations, clear-cut rules, or a clear-cut direction of where to go. So one of the ways that I look at it is, what other option do we have than to practice, to try something and see how it works, and if it feels good or if it gets us closer to what we want, then we'll probably do more of that. If we try something and it feels disastrous or it moves us further from what we want, we'll probably do a little less of that. I'm excited there's some answers coming in right now. And so we'll incorporate these into our discussion. So somebody said, not reacting the same way when the other person does the same thing. Oh man, I love this. And we're going to address that really directly in a minute. So the next answer that came in says, I'm new here, so I'm not sure what changes I should make. My boyfriend is recovering from alcohol and a porn addict. Also really relevant to our discussion about practice. And then another one that came in says, I have a fear of speaking my truth for the fear of being oppressed by other people's anger and denial. All right, well, all these are incredibly relevant to this concept of practice. So let's dive in. I think one of the first steps in having effective relationship practice is having a clear direction or a clear goal to be working towards. And I think that this is most effective maybe as you get this skill under your belt and have a little more confidence with it. In the future, your goal may be a little more vague, a little more abstract, but to begin with, you want to be really behavioral. You want to be really focused on a specific behavior, and I would encourage it to be one of your behaviors. It's really easy to have a list of your partner's behavior or the person you're in a relationship with, the behavior you want them to change. I know I spend a lot of time thinking about that in my relationships, but the only behavior that I can ultimately change is my own. So start with what you can see. So I think this first response, not reacting the same way when the other person does the same thing, that's a really good place to start with. What's my behavior in that moment? I'm not wanting to change. It may look like I have this habitual response of saying, what were you thinking when my partner does something that surprises me? And you may know from years or decades or however long that interaction has been going, you may know that that's not a really effective response. But starting with that, here's my specific behavior that I want to change. That's how we start practicing, because we have something that's very tangible to look at how we're doing with. So we may make a goal to notice that specific example of saying, what are you doing, when our partner does something that surprises us. We may make a goal in the beginning to circle back and apologize when we give that response. Not because we were wrong in our emotion, but to be able to say, I'm sorry, I know that response wasn't helpful. But the key is that you have a very specific point, a very specific behavior that you're focused on. Because nothing's more demoralizing when we're working towards something or practicing when we don't know what direction we're going. I just started coaching my son's basketball team. It's a team of third graders, and last week was our first practice. And as soon as I put a ball in their hands, they knew what the goal was. It was to get it in the hoop. And there was no ambiguity around that. In fact, they were so focused on getting in the hoop, they weren't paying attention to some of the finer points of the game, like don't double dribble, don't push the person down next to you. But they had this very clear goal that they were going towards. So when we practice, we've got to have a clear goal. The second point I would say is set some key indicators. And what key indicators are measuring points. So if my goal is to, for example, one of the questions here, I'm new here. I don't know what changes I should make. My boyfriend is recovering from alcohol and porn addiction. I would imagine that there may be a lot of fear or uncertainty going on right now. And so that may be that goal is I want to feel less afraid. I want to feel less uncertain. And I know for a lot of the spouses that I work with, one of those really tangible key indicators, something that either feeds the fear or suspicion or helps that is, we call it snooping, or looking through our partner's things to find out whether they've been clean or whether they've not been clean. For some people, that ability to have transparency or that ability to see what's going on is really helpful for them. So one of the key indicators may be I need to have more access to what's going on in my partner's life. So getting to that key indicator, maybe we need to set up a weekly check-in. I need to let my partner know that I would like to be able to check the messages on his phone twice a week. For other people, that kind of information or that kind of snooping, especially in secret, that can be a big overload. That can be damaging. So your key indicator, it may be snooping, and it may be I need to do less of that. So I'm not going to pick up my partner's phone when they're not in the room. I'm not going to go and ask people in my partner's life about what they're doing without my partner's knowledge of that. So you want to pick like 2 or 3 key indicators that help you determine whether or not you're moving in that direction. In our first example of, I'm going to try not to say, what were you thinking? One of the key indicators may be my partner and I can have a conversation around something that surprises me that lasts more than 3 minutes. And if I'm lasting more than 3 minutes, that means that I'm maintaining myself a lot better than I was before, because our conversations used to last 15 seconds. Because as soon as I had my gut response, my partner was overwhelmed and defensive and out the door. So pick some really specific measuring points that you're going to take as whether you're moving closer to your goal or your practice is effective or moving further away from that. The last point I would say is to evaluate yourself. And this is, I think, one of the hardest parts of practice, because usually when I'm practicing something new, I know that I'm not good at it. And I know that the evaluation is not going to be like this glowing, hey, everything was great and that was perfect. There's going to be a lot of room for improvement. In fact, Tammy mentioned this intensive that I was doing for men in Phoenix. I was doing that with the man who created this Mother Enmeshed Man intensive, and I've been learning from him for the last year. And it's been a really good learning process, and I've grown a lot. But I've had to be willing to get feedback from him because this is a new process for me. It's not like I jumped in and intuitively knew what to do. There have been a lot of times where he's said to me, tell me about why you took that approach, because I don't know that was extremely effective. Let me tell you about the approach I was thinking about. So soliciting feedback from people that we trust and people who are safe for us, I think, is key. Some of those people may be your therapist. maybe people in your 12-step or other support groups. It may be a friend who is a fair witness and knows what's going on for you. And there's also ways that we have to be able to evaluate ourselves. So, for example, this third piece that came in here, I have a fear of speaking my truth for fear of being oppressed by other people's anger or denial. So one of those ways of evaluating, am I speaking my truth? Am I leaning into that fear from the reaction of the people I get? I really love this question. Am I proud of how I just interacted there? You know, I don't think it's always speaking our truth as I'm going to yell it from the housetops or I'm going to shout at anybody's face who's standing in my way, because sometimes that's not a safe or a wise decision. So some of that being able to speak your truth, I think, can come from, I knew when to be quiet. I knew when that was going to fall on deaf ears. I knew when that was the battle that I didn't want to fight. And so that question, am I proud of how I did in that interaction, I think is a really good self-evaluation question. You may also ask, how did I feel after that? You know, sometimes practicing a new skill in a relationship is mostly scary. And it maybe doesn't feel good immediately after we practice that skill, but the goal may not be to feel good. It may be I'm working on some of my denial and I'm working on some of those patterns. So maybe I feel clear and I feel present in what happened, but it makes me sad. That's okay. So kind of looking at what are the reasonable outcomes here, and am I feeling in a range that helps me to gauge where I'm going? Something that's key about evaluation, and I mentioned this a little bit before, it's got to be somebody who's safe. And safety isn't just they're always sugary sweet to me and say nice things. I know that there have been people in my life that have not felt safe because they were too much of a cheerleader. They only saw what was working or what they said was working and wasn't. So you want to have people who can really fairly help you to see both sides. People who can really give you some of that tougher feedback when you need it. But I think the key is that you have a feeling that person has your back, that if they have tough feedback for you, it's because they care about you and they want your growth, or they're invested in your growth, not just because they're there to be a critic. So those are the 4 points of how to practice in relationships and why we might want to. So the first point, again, just in review, it's all an experiment. You weren't given a manual for this. So try some things out. You'll figure out what works and you'll figure out what doesn't. Have a clear goal, what you want to change. Make that behavioral. Make it really specific so you can know when you're doing it and when you're not. The third, have some key indicators. So some of this might be when I'm making this change, I expect to feel less stress. I expect to feel proud of myself the majority of the time that I have an interaction in my relationship. Or it may be I fight with my partner less, or I provoke my partner's anger less. That's something I think really key at the beginning of recovery is there are so many battles to fight because there's so much that's not working. And we really have to keep in mind what the larger goal in the war is, which may be I want to keep this relationship, or I want to keep myself safe. So have some key indicators that help you to know if you're moving in the direction, and then evaluating yourself, having safe people around you who can help you in fair evaluation, asking for help, and also knowing those feelings inside of you that help you to know how you're doing. So that's the lecture portion for today.
So I'd like you to elaborate on how to find a fair witness, because that's a term that's used in therapy and in recovery groups and things like that. But, that is not a term that I grew up with. So if you can elaborate on that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, good question. You're not going to find a fair witness by walking into a support meeting and saying, hey, somebody be my fair witness. A fair witness is somebody who knows you and who knows enough of your story. And oftentimes, for those of us in recovery, that's not somebody that we have in our corner the first time we walk into recovery or even into a therapist's office. A fair witness takes some time to build that. I think you want to have a decent idea of who that person is. I always tell folks when they go to peer-to-peer recovery, look for someone in the room who you're like, I hope my recovery looks like theirs when I'm at the point that they're at. And then you work on that relationship. So you get to know them, you unfold your story gradually. I think a lot of people can get kind of burned out in seeking a support person because they go and they, we're really desperate for that support person and we're desperate for that kind of connection. We go and tell our whole story to anyone who will listen, and then we feel really exposed. We feel really burned out in that. So let the story unfold slowly, see that person in a variety of situations, in a variety of interactions, so you get an idea of how they are from a lot of different angles. And when you start to feel some trust, or you start to feel some safety, or you start to feel like I could take a risk with this person and it would probably be okay, that may be a person who's fair witness material. And you may ask them, hey, I'm needing some help with a specific problem in my relationship or the specific issue in my relationship. I know that I play a role. Can I tell you the story, and would you give me some honest feedback?
That's really helpful. And I think you also shared when looking at the evaluation and soliciting feedback that it was, like the person asked you, can you tell me why, you did this? So they wanted to understand the framework that you did it from, not just you did that wrong,
Yeah.
So what I found for myself is if I ask, and even within a relationship, if I ask, can you tell me why you did this? Because I just want to understand, the stuff I've made up in my head may be completely different. But, then if you're like for me, so I might have missed something that the other person sees and they go, oh, did you realize, A, B, and C? No, I did not. Or they go, oh, now I understand why you did that. Okay, now that helps me have perspective on it and I can see why you did that. All of those things are really useful, but it isn't in the, it's helpful, and it's not even criticism. It's exploring the framework versus so I'm inviting input and I'm inviting feedback, but they're getting a better framework from where I'm coming from,
Yeah. Fair witnessing takes time and it takes context. So, someone who's in a rush may have a hard time being a fair witness.
Well, and I was thinking even getting input on, like setting the key indicators. I thought it's challenging early on, like the person that was sharing that new to all of this, it's challenging to even pick, like how would I even know? So, finding someone that can help you, well, just try this one first and then try that one next, but, helping get some framework for that, so to the person that was on here, and I know you posted more, so we'll have John address that too. But, a lot of it is there's a lot of people that have gone before you. So you don't have to do this all yourself from the beginning. There is a lot of help and support. So,
let's get to some other parts of these questions. And then I've got a follow-up question that I'd like some more input on.
So there was a follow-up to the truth. This person said, I've cut out toxic relationships and am in the phase of trying to make new healthy friendships as knowing what to look out for. Yes, rather than focusing on fear and a no and feeling scared of being in old dynamics.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a couple of to me, this is some evidence that some effective change has taken place. I think it's really difficult to, first of all, identify toxic relationships and then to take the step of cutting those out when there's not another alternative. And I really like what am I saying yes to in future relationships, and what do I know I need to say no to in future relationships. I think that's a really robust way to build that circle of support, rather than I know what I don't want. There's a lot of things that don't meet the criteria of what we don't want, but still may not be what we need. And there's a lot of things that may meet the criteria of what we do want, but there may be some elements that are off. Your change and your healing and your growth, I think, is important enough to take the time to do it well, and to take the time to make sure that you're not just taking the next thing that comes along, but you're really getting what you need and avoiding what you don't.
Well, and I've had different friendships over my lifetime. And some of them are lifelong. I've got some that are deep and true. And, I'm 30 years from now, if we're both still alive, we'll still be friends. And then I've had other people that were kind of time and place. And so I'm thinking with this one, like there may be some people that are in your life that are healthier relationships, but they're more transitory. They'll help you get to the next step. But I also thought, it's so easy to be comfortable with the old that like any kind of new and different is going to feel different. So as you're exploring what a healthy friendship is, it may feel off just because you're used to the old toxic. So, so really great awarenesses though that I'm really proud of you for being willing, because like a lot of people just go, I'm just going to keep these because I know them, even though they're not working for me, I know them. So
isn't that such a huge part of recovery? We're moving from what's familiar and not working into what's unfamiliar and we hope will work better.
Yes.
And it's scary because there's no guarantees. That's why I like this concept of practice, because practice is low stakes, but it makes a big difference. And one of the things my recovery taught me is there's nothing that I said yes to today that I can't say no to tomorrow. And there's nothing.
That's great.
And there's few things that I said no to today that I can't circle back and say, actually, that's a yes. But giving ourselves that perspective to say, I may not get it right, but I can adjust things down the road, I think is really, really helpful.
Well, and I think the incremental, like you were talking about, sharing your story and yourself incrementally, so that you can find out if they're a safe person and if they're really, a big fit, or if they're just going to be more, like, oh, they're fun to go to coffee with once a week or something like. Well, great, that's a surface, versus somebody that knows you. So
yeah.
So the person that has the boyfriend who's alcoholic and a porn addict indicated they don't snoop because I know he can hide it. I'm not sure if he does or not, but he takes his phone into the bathroom for 20 plus minutes, and then she panics.
Yeah. This what this person said here, I think, is a really good example of maybe recognizing that something's not working, but we don't have a solution in place yet. And change is not just about doing things that make change happen. I think a lot of change is about stopping what's not serving us anymore. And sometimes there's that in-between place of I know that snooping's not going to get me anywhere because things can be hidden, and I'm realistic about that. I'm not going to think that I'm such a good detective that I can find the truth just by looking. So sometimes we come to that realization that this behavior I want to engage in, it's not going to get me closer to what I want. It's not going to make me feel better, but I don't know what it is. And so that's some of that, I think, waiting and evaluation place. I'm thinking of things that I'm currently practicing in my life right now. I've recently taken up, well, not recently, it's been like a year and a half, I took up mountain biking. And I'm still not, I have friends that I ride with who, they laugh at me because I get off my bike when the hill is too steep and I walk down.
That's called smart. So
that's right. Right. I know a lot of people who can do that with skill. That's not me yet. And I don't have another alternative yet. But I stay within my limits. I stay with what I know is not going to hurt me. And I have confidence that a solution will present itself down the road. And I think that's such a big part of the change process. We can get so anxious about, well, what do I do? That we forget sometimes we can't see what to do until we've stopped doing for a little while, and new options appear.
So anything in that situation, like any practical suggestions?
That's where I think moving from, I would call it the detective space, into the how's this relationship feeling space. Because because for a lot of the spouses that I work with, and I don't mean to bring this out here to minimize the pain that comes with betrayal of a porn addiction or a sex addiction, but I've heard so many partners of sex and porn addicts say, it's not actually the porn that hurts me the worst, it's the dishonesty. And so playing detective and finding the facts with someone who's really good at hiding things, that's kind of a losing proposition. But maybe you say something like, I would like us to have a face-to-face 2-minute check-in every night. And I would like you to share with me one feeling that you're having, and maybe just something that happened in your day. And so you get practice reading that person's body language, and you get practice sharing. So you may share one feeling and one thing that happened in your day, and you see how receptive they are to you. Because I've seen a lot of relationships where maybe the addictive behavior has not stopped yet, but the ability to accurately see their partner has changed. And that makes a world of difference in the relationship. And so, organizing around what's the next threat, although I get why that happens in the beginning because those threats are really, really painful, it may not be what you're looking for long term. I was talking with a spouse that I was last week, and she said something like, well, as long as he never crosses this bottom line again, I will be happy. And then she started laughing, and I said, well, what's that laughter about? And she said, there's no way in the world that's the minimum bar for happiness in my relationship, that he just doesn't do this awful thing. Like, I want more than that. And that's one of the things that this spouse has been focusing on in her recovery. Like, yes, there's the bottom line behavior she's concerned about, but she's also focusing on opening up invitations for her partner to be more relational and have opportunities to kind of be in a feeling space in the relationship, so that she can feel the availability there, and he can feel, he may get a chance to decide, I like this a lot better than the stuff I've been doing in secret, and it's right here with a real person who's willing to do that with me.
So, and Dr. Rob wrote a book called Out of the Doghouse, and it's for men who've cheated, but it really is a great book on exercises you can do to rebuild trust. What's going to take to rebuild trust? And I thought, wow, one of the things, like if my husband was doing that, I'd be like, when you go into the bathroom and you take your phone, I have feelings about that. It would be really helpful for me if you'd be willing to leave your phone out here while you use the bathroom. And and it'd be, I think, an opportunity for me, it'd be an opportunity for me to share my feelings, and for my partner to say, okay, you and this relationship are valuable. Do I really need to take my phone into the bathroom?
That's the kind of stuff where the proof is in the pudding. Again, it's I made this really clear request about what I needed, and I shared why I needed that. I'm scared when you take your phone in the bathroom. It would be helpful if you didn't. And then the information that you get back is, where's his commitment? Is he really concerned about my fear? And that is, I think, a lot more helpful information than is he using or not.
Yeah.
Because somebody can stop using and not learn to care about you. Somebody can care about you and learn to stop using, though. And I think that's kind of the best of both worlds there.
Yeah. So there's a comment here. Thanks, John. That's exactly where I am with lots of robust changes. I'm sure it's scary and it's exciting too. And I'm feeling lonely and have been expecting new relationships now, in healthier, and have been self-talking, there is something wrong with me. So hearing now, or how I am feeling about the yes and no is good. And it's okay to keep going. My main struggle is that my struggling to find it in recovery. Thankfully blessed to have an amazing sponsor. Oh, that is good. Who is in recovery. I do want another fellow, but am both in, but another fellow, but our both is US, and I'm in the UK, and I'm struggling to find that in the rooms currently. I guess I'll just have to wait out and trust that it will come. So there's lots of people in the UK in recovery that are looking for healthier relationships. So.
And I've found in both my recovery and a lot of my clients, it's that continually showing up that gives you the opportunities to find those people. I think in a lot of ways, recovery can be lonely. I had a client who recently started dating again after a divorce due to his addiction, and he said these first dates are a lot more intense than I remember my first dates before. And I said, well, what's going on? And he said, well, I'm telling him that I'm in recovery and that I have to, I can't meet until 7 o'clock because my 12-step meeting gets over at this time. And I said, you've got to remember that these women you're dating, they're not used to walking into a room full of strangers and being completely vulnerable like we do in the rooms. And he said, oh, well, that's one of the important ways that I find value in connecting with people like that. I was like, yeah, there is a lot of value in connecting with people like that, but you're not going to connect with everybody like that. And so, yeah, it does take time. The more opportunities you give yourself to meet people and be in positions to get to know them, the more people you'll get to meet and get to know. But I do think that loneliness is one of the hardest parts of recovery. So I hope you'll keep going with it, and it will come.
Well, and explore some recreation outside of recovery too, because I like to be active. So I, joined a co-ed volleyball team when I was single, and met some people, and even if they weren't people I wanted to date, I still had fun, and so part of that was filling in the lonely too. Whether it's like you want to do art, or you want to take a class, or you want to join a book group. I mean, I think anything that you find joyful for you, and you expand your horizons, you'll find some healthy people doing those things, and you never know who you're going to meet.
There's another place that you practice the same guy who was, sharing his first step on a first date. Well, one of the things that we looked at is this website, meetup.com. And I said, you should give it a try. And he's been practicing ways to meet new people. And he came back a couple weeks after getting on Meetup, and he said, there's a lot of weird people out there. And I said, yeah, there are. And he said, I think I'm learning how to find the less weird people and identify the weird people more readily. But that's because he's practiced. Like he's gone to some meetups that were they weren't dangerous, but they were really uncomfortable for him because the people he'd gone to meet up with were kind of out there. But he took that data, he evaluated, and he's getting a lot better at meeting up and finding people that are a lot more in his range of relationships that he's looking for. But it didn't start out that way. It's a skill he's had to hone.
It's a skill. None of us have that skill. So we all have to, it's different when you're doing it as a teenager versus you're an adult, and you've, especially if you've been out of the dating world for a while and you have to, or whatever, like I was very isolated. I was out there at the bars all the time when I was drinking, but I was very isolated. I had to learn to make, and particularly for me, to make friendships with women was a challenge. I have now other than my husband, my big friendships are, mostly women, because they are safe for me, but that wasn't the case. They were competition, so learning to make, friendships and connections with safe people, of both sexes for different reasons, it took a lot of practice for me, and I didn't get it right. I got it right now. My husband and I are great, but yeah.
Your needs and the way that you approach and attach in relationships, it changes as you get older. It changes when there's big changes in your life. So entering recovery, loss, moving. I look at now, I moved to a new neighborhood about 3 years ago, and the way that I connect with my neighbors now is very different than the way I connected with my neighbors in the old neighborhood, because I was in a different phase of life and my neighbors were in a different phase of life, and it worked differently. The way I connected with neighbors in my old neighborhood was we did home projects together because we all lived in old homes that we were rehabbing.
Yeah.
We moved to a new neighborhood, and now I can call somebody up and say, let's go for a bike ride, or let's go for a hike, or do you want to go get some coffee? And it's not like, oh, I've got to do all this stuff. It's like, sure, let's go. It's your ways of connecting and your needs in connecting are going to be changing all the time. And that's not a bad thing. that means that you're a living organism and you're growing.
Well, and it's kind of like we were talking about, like there are friends that you're friends with them for a time and a place, or, like you've moved, so you're in a different neighborhood. So the people that you were neighbors with, some of them you may still be in contact with regularly, but, chances are pretty good less, because of proximity. So, and it's all fine. So,
yeah. So I'm going to put up in here another question, and you can reply in the chat, or if you have a specific question, put it up in the Q&A so we make sure that we don't miss it. But I also think part of this process, if we go at any kind of change and we're just from that perspective, I don't know how to do this and I'm not very good at this, we're gonna struggle more than if we can go in with a fair evaluation. And so I'm gonna put the question out there: what strength do you have when it comes to making changes in your life? Sometimes we don't realize an opportunity that's there for us in making change because we don't remember how we've done it before, and we need to give ourselves credit there. So think about that question for a minute and go ahead and respond, and we can discuss. So we have somebody who just put in, knowing that everything is temporary, so being willing to see hope in changes. I love that. I think I can be a whole lot more anxious in undertaking change in my life when I'm thinking I've got to find the permanent thing that's going to last me forever, versus I've got to find what's going to work for me now. And knowing that's changed, I'm much more willing to take risks. I'm much more willing to try this out for now, knowing that it may not be the solution to this problem in a month, 2 months, a day, whatever. But that's okay, because that's not the goal. Any other responses to that question, or questions in general? We don't have to keep talking about practicing. If you have other questions.
I wanted to tag on one more thing. I think part of it too is, as I change, and I want to continue to grow, the things I look for in relationships are different. But Dr. Rob has talked about, a 4 is not going to attract a 10, so. But you can be a 4 with a 6 and both be growing and making progress. So it's finding somebody that's compatible for you. But if you want to attract an 8, you better work on making sure that you're closer to the 8 than a 2.
Yeah. What's in my wife this weekend sent me an article from the Gottman blog. We'll read those every now and then, and this article was talking about how hurtful it can be to relationships to have the goal be happiness. Because I said that's a really big burden to place on another person, and it's a really big burden to take on yourself, the happiness of another person. They said the research is actually indicating that relationships where there's a lot of contentment and value are relationships where growth, mutual growth, is one of the focuses. And so it's moving away from this it's got to feel this way or it's got to be this way, into we're evolving into something that has never existed before. Let's see where this goes. So we had somebody put in one of their assets in making changes, curiosity. If I could choose a relationship asset or a personal asset and I could only have one, I think I would want it to be curiosity. First of all, I really I like living in a world that I think is interesting. And I love questions, and I love what ifs and why nots. I also think that curiosity really helps us to move outside the box in our old storyline. It really helps us to challenge old ways of thinking, or maybe even ways of thinking that weren't even ours. It may have been family rules. Curiosity lets us explore, and I think there's a lot to be found when we explore. Somebody else put in the ability to self-evaluate. Now having a trusting relationship with my sponsor where I'm able to show up and be honest and reflective, which feels so different than anything I've experienced and feels good. And there are other recovery friends, and trusting in the hope that more will come because it feels good. Yeah, really, really great assets there. And I like the taking inventory of relationships. Do you have enough relationships now that are supportive, that are safe for you? Because I don't know that there's a magical number that says, all right, now I have the relationships I need to go forward. I think it's, do I have enough to get started? Do I have enough to start making this change? And that's a real gift.
I agree. I think it's interesting what you were sharing about the Gottman study too. And, I've heard a lot of relationships where they go, oh, he makes me happy. And I immediately bristle with that. I was like, I don't want anybody making me happy. I think I have to grow that from within me and find joy. And otherwise, if I'm dependent on you to make me happy, you can also make me very unhappy. So
Yeah. I always say our relationship should augment our happiness and our satisfaction and our security, not provide it. Not because that's not a wonderful thing to experience, but people change and circumstances can change like that. And I think there's a valuable piece of resilience when we can feel like this is mine and I'm inviting you into it because I feel like you'll enhance that. I feel like you'll help me with that. Versus I'm inviting you into this hole and now I need you to provide, or you've invited me into that hole and now I need to provide.
So Dr. Rob just did a podcast with Dr. Stan Tatkin, and I was listening to that, and it's We Do, and he was talking about the goal of a relationship is that the two of you, now it's two of you against the world, you're stronger as a unit. So if we focus on, is this good for the relationship rather than is this good for me, And I was like, wow, I love that analogy. And I really, I see that in my relationship with my husband is like, I want to do things that are supportive of our relationship. And there are things it's usually the television and he's got a basketball game on and I just go, it just doesn't matter if, there are times it matters, but if he's happy and he is, then fine. And it's just not that big of a deal, but other things, like if I said, I really hate that, I'm sure he would turn it off. I just don't but if I keep the focus on what's good for our relationship, we're rather than just me. Well, first of all, it takes me out of myself, which is always a good thing. So, but I just felt like that was a really good analogy. So for those of you joining us, if you haven't listened to the podcast series yet, John Taylor's done 2 of them with Dr. Rob, but the latest one that just launched last Thursday was with Dr. Stan Tatkin. Lots of great information on those 2. So
yeah, I'll have to take a look at that.
Take a listen. So did you have any other questions to poll the group with?
Let's do this because I think being able to say out loud what it is we're wanting is one of the things that moves us in the direction of that change. And again, what you say today may not be what you want tomorrow, and that's fine. Because I think hearing it in your own voice is one of those ways of evaluating, does this really represent something that I need? So I'm going to put another question out there. What is one change you are wanting to see in your relationships this week?
Ooh. Especially with this week. That's like,
yeah.
There's the lofty goals of,
Yeah. And I actually, so I definitely set lofty goals and I have big aspirations, but I find if I don't have a guidepost week by week and sometimes day by day, I can really lose that lofty aspiration. So my change that I want to see in my relationships this week, I had a really crazy 2018. I traveled a lot for work. I was really busy, saw a lot of clients. And this workshop that I did in Phoenix, it kind of marked the end of that bit of intensity. And I made a promise to my wife and my 2 boys that they would feel for the next 6 months that that the majority of my extra energy was going to go back into our family. So what I did was going to be making their lives better and was going to be making our home a more comfortable place instead of them feeling a lot of that going into my career. And that's a gift that I want to give because they have been incredibly supportive to the work I've been doing the last year. So
that's great.
Yeah. Somebody just put in, they said, with my son, allowing him the space to fully express himself without cutting him off or immediately reacting with the automatic answer of no. I love that. Such specific behaviors. You know when you're cutting your kid off, and you know when you're saying no just out of habit. So I love that. That'll be a really great experiment. If you're back on the call next week, I would love to hear how that goes. And then somebody else said, I want to do something fun. We're going to sign up for something fun. That's become a really important part of enjoying my relationships, as well as having something fun in the future to look toward. And especially, I find a lot of value in things that I haven't done before and don't have a lot of experience with. I love taking new adventures with people that I care about.
So that was me, and you know what we are talking about? Dance.
What's that? What, dance lessons? What kind of dance?
I think it was ballroom, and he actually, he was like, he found a Groupon or something like that. So he was like, this week, and it was this week. He said, this week I'm going to register us for those classes. What day works for you? And I was like, you go, I'm going. So
wow,
isn't that wild? So
yeah. Have you done dance classes before?
We did a really long time ago, and we did good in the dance lessons, but then we neglected to practice. I kept saying we should practice, and we never. So you can't improve if you don't practice. So
true. It's true. My wife always says that she wants to take a dance class with me until we're at a party and I'm in a dancing mood, and then she's like, I don't think that dancing is your thing.
She's you never know. With the right instructor. Yeah, my husband's actually a good dancer, but it's one of but we haven't practiced together. And if you're a couple and you want to dance as a couple, I'm not dancing with the stars. I need help. So
yeah, I love that. Somebody else just posted, in trying to make new friends, I'm going to sign up for a class or something new that could bring me joy. I love that too, because you're going to know when you've signed up for that class, and you're going to know if you didn't. So that's really measurable. And you can evaluate, how did that feel? And often in taking steps like this, I'm guessing if you're signing up for a class, there's probably a little bit of time between when you sign up and you actually go. And you may experience some anxiety because this is something new. Anxiety is not always something to run from, or to say, because I'm feeling anxiety, this is not the right choice. Now, if you signed up for like a bullfighting class, feel anxiety because that's dangerous. I can say that with some definite authority. But sometimes anxiety is a sign from us that this is important to me and I want to be careful. Or this is important to me and I want to do this quote unquote right. So anxiety is something to pay attention to when you're practicing, and it's not just something to say that feels wrong. Sometimes that I found that the more I kind of identify this is what I want to do and the change I want to make, anxiety becomes exciting to me, and it morphs kind of from this anxiety into this anticipatory thrill. What is this going to be like? I've never done this before.
Well, and with signing up for the class, because like I remember doing that and being a little intimidated and sweaty palms and going, oh my gosh, I'm going to this, by myself and all this. And then I had this thought that like everybody else that's in the class is probably exactly like me, where they're coming in and they don't know. And then I was like, okay, so I took a deep breath and opened up the door and put a smile on my face and just, decided to try. So it was definitely, I would, I'm sure my heart was racing too. I just remember the sweaty palms and going, of course it's always like, I'm going to be so different and, no one's going to want to talk to me. And I just was like, you know what, let's just like get over myself and just, try. So
yeah. Show up and practice. If it worked, great. If it didn't, you might want to take a look. Like, why don't people talk to me? One of my favorite self-evaluation questions, and this I would recommend for a therapist or a sponsor because it's a tougher question, but asking, what is it like to be in a relationship with me? When I've asked that question, in years past, and I probably still need some work on it, I got feedback that said my face is not approachable. I have a scowl on my face more often than not.
Oh, interesting.
And it's been really helpful to hear that from people who I know support me and love me. because I can look at, I don't want you to feel like you can't approach me. I do want to be approachable. And so I pay attention to the tension in my face, and I make sure that it's, if, smiling all the time is not real John Taylor yet, but not scowling is. I can have a relaxed face. Mm-hmm. Somebody also put up with current friends, sitting with and letting them express themselves without feeling the need to rescue them from their feeling of uncomfortable with any sort of advice giving, just sitting in the moment with them. I can also ask just to check, are you looking to express rather than feedback?
That's awesome.
Yeah, I really like those real specific behaviors. There's an exercise in discomfort is when somebody's talking to you about a problem, just supportive statements or listening statements. Oh, I hear you. Oh, that would be so hard. I don't know what and sometimes I have found it even helpful to say, I'm not even sure what to say about that. But I like that. I'll be interested to hear how you experiment with moving out of that rescuer and just being able to let that person have the space.
Yeah, it is challenging. So
yeah. Any other questions or strengths, something that you want to work on this week?
Well, Dr. Rob is on tonight at 5 p.m. Pacific time. So for those of you joining us, would love to have you join that conversation as well. So thank you, John, and we'll see you all next week.
Thanks for the participation, everybody. I want to do another format like this.
We'll see if the same people come back. It'll be interesting to hear the follow-up. It'll be great. So
yeah, definitely. And yet, Tammy said you are recording it.
Yes, this has been recorded and it will be placed on the sexandrelationshiphealing.com website. So you can go back and listen to this and others. We have found that people can't always connect during the time, but people are tracking on those, on the recorded one. So it's all good.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.